I used to believe that injustice only existed out in society, not inside the very home where I grew up. But that belief shattered the day my younger brother received a brand new car while I got an electric bill with my name on it. They called it growing up with responsibility. I called it the first slap of truth. Someone asked me the exact moment I realized I was the extra in my own family, I wouldn't hesitate. It was the night they popped champagne to celebrate Luke, and I sat silently by the sink washing each glass like a nameless server. They called me Layla, the 23-year-old daughter who still hasn't figured out her future. My family lived in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, a 2-story colonial-style house with a white picket fence and a blue front door my mother liked to boast about as a symbol of family tradition. But the only real tradition in that house was favoritism. My father, Charles Monroe, was a man who issued commands disguised as gentle suggestions. My mother, Denise, always maintained a softness that bordered on emotional paralysis. She often smiled faintly and said, "Up to you," whenever something made her uncomfortable. And then there was Luke, the 21-year-old golden boy of the family. Even though he'd had his license suspended for speeding and never held a proper job aside from a few days at a sports shop, Luke was still the pride. My father called him the true heir, and my mother often whispered, "He just needs more time to find his path." And me? I was studying graphic design online, working 2 part-time jobs just to make ends meet, and never once asked them for help with tuition or living expenses. But whenever someone asked, my mother would smile and say, "Luke's studying business and Layla is still exploring herself," as if I were wandering a desert, not grinding every single day just to survive. I still remember something that happened when I was 16. Luke was 14 and took my father's car without permission to pick up his friends for pizza at midnight. He ended up crashing into a street lamp 3 blocks away. The police brought him straight home. But when my father found out, he didn't yell at Luke. Instead, he turned to me with those cold steel gray eyes. "You knew he was going to do this, didn't you? Why didn't you stop him?" I didn't know. I had been studying for my biology exam all night. But the truth didn't matter. In the Monroe family, when Luke messed up, everyone else was to blame. Except Luke. Later, I named them the Monroe House Rules. Rule 1. The older sister is responsible for preventing her brother's mistakes, whether psychic or law enforcement. Rule 2. Everything Luke did wrong could be soothed with a fancy dinner and my silence. Rule 3. The cruelest. Love, here, was always conditional. My parents never said it outright, but I felt it. When I earned a full scholarship my freshman year, they only asked, "Do you think you should study something more practical?" When Luke passed a basic economics class with a B+, they called it a huge step forward. I had started a small Etsy shop selling greeting cards I designed and printed myself. One customer from California ordered 50 for a wedding. When I mentioned it at dinner, my father just smirked. "Still playing with those colorful hobbies, huh? When are you going to get a real paycheck?" I was about to respond with my monthly order stats, but Luke cut in. "Mom, Dad, I think I want to start a YouTube channel on investment tips." And just like that, every eye turned to Luke, lit up as if he had just announced a plan to save the world. I ate my cold dinner quietly, like a nameless shadow. That night, I began planning my escape, right when Luke got his shiny new SUV. Black metallic, leather interior, wrapped in a giant red bow like something out of a holiday ad. Dad handed him the keys. Mom cried tears of joy. I laughed, not from happiness, but from finally understanding. I was just a tenant in the House of Monroe. Dad turned to me, voice flat like a financial report. "Starting next month, you'll need to contribute to the household. $200 a week. You can manage that, right?" I swallowed a dry piece of meat, lifted my head. "You mean rent?" "Call it what you want," he replied, then turned back to watch Luke admire the steering wheel. Mom said nothing. She was polishing a wine glass, eyes avoiding mine as if I had just insulted the family. That night, I sat on my bed, laptop on my knees, booking a one-way bus ticket. I picked Asheville, North Carolina. neither too big nor too small, far enough not to be found, close enough in case I changed my mind. But I didn't plan to. I wrote a farewell letter, though it felt more like a damage ledger. I listed every detail. 10 family dinners I cooked and cleaned for without so much as a mention of my name. 6 months of gas bills I paid that Mom thought Dad had handled. 8 times I was blamed for Luke missing deadlines, despite not even studying the same subject. No anger, just facts, like a balance sheet. I packed only what mattered. Not dresses, not sparkly memories. Just my laptop, where all my Etsy orders, customer reviews, and next year's plan lived. A handmade necklace, my first sold item, and a worn leather sketchbook filled with ideas I hadn't dared speak aloud. I hid my duffel bag under the bed. Didn't want anyone to notice. Not that they ever did. Tuesday I worked both shifts, bakery and bookstore. In between, I Googled how to open a bank account in another state. I counted every cent. I had exactly $1,485.85. Enough to survive 3 weeks in a cheap sublet, if I was careful. Wednesday, I printed the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into a cream envelope, the same shade as our kitchen walls. On it, I wrote, "To those who thought I'd never leave." Thursday, I bought the bus ticket. Paid in cash. No trace. Friday, I quit both jobs. Told them I was transferring schools. Both managers hugged me tight. One whispered, "Layla, you deserve more than this." Saturday, Mom called me down to dinner. Dad wasn't home. Luke was live streaming something in his room. Mom cooked lasagna. My childhood favorite. She served me a plate, paused, and said, "Next week, start paying rent, okay? Don't make Dad remind you." I looked at her. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. Yes, but just this once. She didn't get it. She didn't have to. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, not in regret, but relief. At 4:10 a.m., I dressed, grabbed my duffel, and slipped out the back door with the envelope. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, right where I used to wash glasses after Luke's celebration party. I set it down, pulled my hand back like dropping a match into gasoline. I walked out the front door. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because this wasn't running away. It was a declaration. Not goodbye. Closure. Asheville woke up with the scent of fresh roast and mist threading through the Blue Ridge Mountains. I stepped off the bus at 6:25 a.m., dusty sneakers, tired heart pounding like a war drum. No one was there to greet me. And for the first time in my life, that didn't scare me, it set me free. The only person I knew here was Clara Dorsey, my grandmother Evelyn's old friend. I met her once when I was in 5th grade, at a fall book fair. Silver hair, sharp green eyes, a mind like a blade. Dad had stayed unusually quiet that whole visit. I never forgot that. I called her from a payphone outside the station. 3 rings, then, "Hello?" Her voice was low, alert, as if she never really slept. "This is Layla Monroe. I left home. I'm in Asheville." A pause. "Send me the address, I'll be there." 30 minutes later, a faded olive green Ford pulled up. Clara stepped out in a burgundy wool coat, her eyes meeting mine with no need for questions. "Did you bring all your documents?" she asked as I stepped into the car. "Yes, the sample lease agreement and my financial planning notebook." She nodded like she was approving an immigration file. "Good, let's get home first, we'll talk later." Miss Clara's house was on the west side of town, nestled between 2 rows of maples turning red. Gray-painted exterior filled with books, plants, and soft jazz playing from an old radio. Nothing fancy, but everything had soul. She brewed tea, placed 2 slices of cornbread on plates, then sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Start talking," she said, her gaze locked on my face. I told her everything, the car gift to Luke, the utility bill in my name, The farewell letter and the sleepless night before leaving Richmond. She didn't interrupt. Didn't pity. Just listened, nodding slightly here and there. Charles hasn't changed, she said when I finished. He's always despised smart women. They make him feel small. I blinked. Miss Clare was the only person who had ever spoken about my father so bluntly. "What are your plans now?" she asked. "I need a job. Any job. As long as it's decent and can cover the first month's rent." She pursed her lips. "Tomorrow, I'll take you to Redfern Bookstore. The owner, Margot Rivera, is an old friend. They need help around the shop. No resume required. Just work ethic and integrity." I nodded, feeling a strange calm for the first time in days. The next morning I walked into Redfern, a vintage bookstore with a faded wooden sign and ivy-draped windows. Inside, soft yellow light bathed the shelves, heavy with the scent of old paper. Margot, a Latina woman with long curly hair, ink-stained hands, and a broad smile, greeted me like I was a long-lost niece. "Clara says you're trustworthy," she said, wiping her hands on her apron and handing me a job application. "I can do anything. Clean, organize, inventory, help with children's books," I said quickly. "I worked at a bakery and an old bookstore in Richmond." Margot didn't ask further, she smiled. "Start Monday, put on a name tag and get ready to work." I walked out of that store with a feeling I hadn't known before. Not being questioned. Not being compared. Not being erased by someone else's shadow. That evening, I helped Miss Clara cook. The small kitchen filled with the aroma of roasted meat, stewed beans and greens tossed in olive oil. She set a porcelain plate in front of me, poured a glass of water, and said, "You live here now. No need to ask anyone's permission, but I have one rule." I held my breath. "Yes, ma'am?" "No one gets to be small in this house. If you want to disappear, choose somewhere else. Here, you must learn to take up space." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that sentence, finally, gave freedom a face. I found the notebook while organizing Miss Clare's bookshelf, tucked among old files, bound in plain leather, no label. At first I thought it was just random scribbles, until halfway through, I saw my name. Not handwritten, but typed, on a bank statement. Beneficiary, Layla Monroe. "Clara?" I called out, my voice caught in my throat. She approached, set her teacup down and raised an eyebrow. "I just found something," I said, handing her the papers. She skimmed them, her eyes shifting from curiosity to tension. Then she exhaled. "So, it's finally surfaced? You knew about this?" I suspected. "Your mother?" "She once had a private trust set up by Evelyn to ensure you wouldn't depend on Charles. But then, it disappeared." I gripped the paper tighter. This trust. It was redirected into an account named Monroe Holdings. Miss Clara stood and walked straight to her study. Minutes later, she returned with a thick file, heavy like a thunderstorm. "I kept a copy of the power of attorney your grandmother gave me. She didn't trust anyone, especially her son-in-law. Maybe it's time you met someone who knows how to turn truth into action." We knocked. After a few seconds, the sound of dragging slippers came closer. My father, Charles Monroe, opened the door. His eyes were sunken, his stubble unshaven, and the arrogance of the man who once ruled every dinner with a single raised eyebrow was gone. "Layla," he said, voice dry, "what are you doing back here?" "I came to take back what's mine," I replied, handing him the documents. Dominic followed up, voice cold and steady. "Mr. Monroe, this is a copy of the court summons. You are being charged with abuse of power of attorney, falsification of financial documents, and unauthorized use of assets from Layla Monroe's trust fund." My father looked at the file, then let out a laugh as faint as a water-stained sheet of paper. "You think a daughter who ran away in the night and lives off strangers can bring me down? You've got nothing but bitterness and fantasy." I stared straight into his eyes. "And you've got nothing left but panic dressed up as arrogance." He scoffed and turned his back. Come in. If we're going to put on a show, let's make it a full performance. We stepped inside. The once orderly house was now a mess. Piles of old newspapers, dirty cups all over the counter. My mother was nowhere to be seen. Dominic glanced around, and I realized the father I once feared as a child was now just a hollow shell. He slumped onto the sofa, lit a cigarette with a trembling hand. "I'm not signing anything," he said, exhaling smoke. "I'm ready to go to court." "Good," I said, pulling out my phone. "But before you decide, you might want to hear this." I played the recording April had given me. Luke's voice echoed through the room like a whisper in a crypt. "Dad said just sign it. She can't do anything anyway, but sometimes I feel terrible. Layla doesn't deserve to be robbed like this." My father turned pale. The cigarette slipped from his fingers. He lunged forward as if to grab the phone, but Dominic stepped in between us. "Touch her, and it becomes assault," he warned. "And trust me, the court won't be lenient with someone like you." Silence fell. Then my father leaned back in the chair, eyes like ashes. "I did it to teach you a lesson," he said slowly. "You didn't appreciate your opportunities. You dared defy me. I built everything, this family, this house, and you walked away like you were the victim?" "Not like," I replied, voice sharp as a scalpel. "I was the victim. And I didn't walk away. I escaped." The front door suddenly opened. My mother stepped in carrying grocery bags. She froze when she saw me, Dominic, and my father's shaken expression. "Layla." I looked at her, my heart stormy and still all at once. "I came to reclaim what's mine, and to ask one thing. How much did you know?" She set the bags down. Her voice trembled, unlike the old days when she avoided every confrontation. "I didn't know the details, but I knew something was wrong, and I was scared. Scared that if I spoke up, everything would collapse." I gave a bitter laugh. "You thought it was still standing?" She looked down, then slipped off her wedding ring. "I signed the divorce papers last week, and I sent copies of the documents Evelyn once gave me to the lawyer's office. I'm done being silent." My father slammed his hand on the table. "You've all betrayed me." Dominic stood, still calm. "No, they've just stopped living under your control." I walked toward the door, but before leaving, I turned back. "You once told me I didn't have the guts to be anything. Thanks to you, I now know what it means to rise from the ashes you left behind." As the door shut behind me, for the first time in my life, I felt it. I had won, not with fists, but with truth. 2 months after facing my father, I walked into Red Fern Bookstore at 7 a.m., holding a hot coffee and my first official paycheck. No more sleepless nights worrying about rent. No more eyes comparing me to Luke like he was the sun and I was just a shadow. Margot, the shop owner, was wiping the counter. She looked up and smiled. "First week's paycheck, how does it feel?" I held it up like a trophy and mimicked an announcer. "Layla Monroe officially no longer a dependent." She burst out laughing and handed me a small box. "A bonus for coming up with the Late Risers Book Club idea. The community loves that you greet every customer by name each morning." I opened it. A fountain pen engraved with LM. I held it tight, not because it was expensive, but because, for the first time, something bore my name, not as a warning, a loan signature, or a burden owed, but as recognition. After my shift, I sat in my favorite corner, opened my laptop. The plan I'd written during midnight hours at Clara's house was coming to life. A real online store, not just Etsy anymore. I called it Thread and Truth, selling handmade crafts and emotional cards for people hurt by those they once trusted. An order had just shipped to Florida. A woman named Diane ordered 12 cards, each one a handwritten message to replace the silence she no longer wished to carry. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Luke. "Just finished my first counseling session at the center. Can we talk later?" I paused, then typed. "Call at 6, only 20 minutes. I don't want to dwell too long in the past." That afternoon, Clara and I had dinner at a small Mexican place. The burritos were spicier than my mother's 20 years of silence. Clara handed me an old folded newspaper. The headline peeked out. Monroe Holdings steps down from city board amid financial allegations. I set my fork down. He'll survive this. Maybe, Clara said. But he no longer holds power. He can't hurt you or your mother anymore. That's enough. I smiled. I didn't need him ruined, I just needed him out of my airspace. That evening I called Luke. His face appeared on Zoom, pale but alert. "Thanks for calling," he said. "I'm not here to comfort you," I replied. "I just want the truth." Luke nodded. "I signed the papers that year. I was wrong. I didn't try to hide it. I just wasn't brave enough to face it." I gripped the edge of my tea mug. "You stayed silent while I was erased from my own future." "I know," Luke said, his voice cracking. "You don't have to forgive me. But I've arranged repayment. You'll receive your tuition back over the next 5 years. It's my responsibility." I stayed quiet, not because I didn't believe him, but because for once he sounded like someone taking ownership. "Good," I said, "because I'm not someone who breaks so easily anymore." A few weeks later, my mother moved into a small apartment near Aunt Lucy's house, started therapy, and enrolled in an art class. The first painting she sent me showed a woman standing on a train platform, no luggage in hand. Only a piece of paper that read, "Freedom comes from within." That painting now hangs in my room, right next to the window overlooking the pine woods. And every morning, when sunlight streams through the glass, I look at it and whisper, "I wasn't left behind, I left at the right time." I returned to Oak Hill Cemetery one quiet afternoon. In my hand was a bundle of wild daisies, the kind Evelyn once called quietly resilient. Her grave lay at the end of the maple trees, unadorned, modest. The stone simply read, "Evelyn Grace Monroe." She did not stay silent, she did not forget. I knelt, placed the flowers at the base, and sat quietly on the grass. "I found it, Grandma," I whispered, "not just the money, but myself." From my pocket, I took out one of the cards I'd recently designed. On the front, the words, "Not everyone who disappears needs to be found. Some need to be chosen again." I placed it on her grave as a thank you. She was the only one who saw me, long before I saw myself. A week later, I was invited to speak at a community seminar at the city's Women's Center, a gathering for those hurt by their own families. I stood before 40 women, most of them with eyes that once knew how to bow, now starting to rise. I told my story, not with a shaky voice, but with the calm of someone who's walked through the storm. "Not all of us leave in the dead of night," I said. "Some leave with a nod, with a letter, or simply by stopping apologizing for existing." After the talk, a girl around 20 came up to me, tears falling but smiling. "I haven't left yet," she said. "But hearing your story, I realized I'm not crazy, not weak. I just haven't believed I deserve better." I took her hand, gave it a gentle squeeze. "You don't need anyone's permission to begin again." Back in Asheville, I stopped in front of the Red Fern bookstore and looked through the window. Margot was helping a young boy pick out a comic book. Clara was seated in the corner, typing something on her laptop. This was my new family. No one here asked, "What did you do to deserve that treatment?" They only asked, "What can you do next so you don't live inside that wound anymore?" That evening, Clara and I sat on the back porch, ginger tea in hand, backs resting against wooden chairs, the sunset casting a warm glow across her silver hair. "Did you ever think you'd forgive Charles?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't need to anymore. Forgiveness is for those who want to keep someone in their memory. I choose to let him drift away." She nodded slowly, then handed me a small envelope. "Read this." I opened it. A handwritten letter. The return address read, "Elijah Bennett, a third-grade teacher from the next town over. The man I met 3 weeks ago while volunteering at a children's book fair. He once asked me, 'If you could redesign a piece of life, where would you begin?'" In the letter, Elijah wrote, "I don't know everything you've been through, but I see who you are now. Upright, calm, and not defined by anyone else. If you'd like, we could start with a cup of coffee. No promises, just listening. I folded the letter and smiled. A fresh start. Not from pain, but from a deliberate choice. For the first time in a very long while, I felt I was living, not just surviving. Layla's story isn't just about escaping a toxic family. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, to rediscover who we are, we must walk away. Not because we're weak, but because we've grown strong enough to choose freedom over endurance. In real life, many like Layla live quietly, wounded by those closest to them, yet still rise, rebuild, and become living proof of value, courage, and rebirth from the ashes. What are your thoughts on Layla's journey? If it were you, would you leave or stay? Share your opinion in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional stories about life, family, and the turning points that define us.